Well, the haters gonna hate, 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 and the faker's gonna fake, 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 baby. I'm just gonna making luck, a Dominion podcast.
Welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast.
A Yuri podcast. No,
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to edit all this out already.
Oh, God. This is, the beginning, 30 seconds are just going to be one big, long bleep. We apologize for technical difficulties on Making Luck, an unstable podcast. Yeah, so, we definitely, thank you for tuning in. We definitely are glad to any of you who are bearing with us after that last episode. Which was a bonus. What?
Oh, the bonus episode, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really great episode.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. And as much as we're going to pretend it never happened, I do want to give a shout out. I do want to give a shout out to Jonas Kilker, who, at the end of the episode, he posted a comment on YouTube about the kingdom we were going to play.
Yeah.
And I think he may have taught us a thing or two.
He nailed it.
Yeah.
I feel like he picked up on a lot of things that we missed.
Yeah, we don't even feel the need to play that kingdom anymore, because I feel like I just know what to do now.
Yeah, I'm not even going to publish the video of the games we played.
Yeah.
Oh, who were we kidding? That was hilarious.
Yeah.
I decided to live stream it this time. Yeah, people showed up. It was pretty decent.
Yeah.
I guess probably do it again.
Yeah, it was fun. So today we are going to be talking about the card rebuild, and we're going to go into the different kind of nuances of that, but, it's the nuances that there are. But before that...
yeah, we'll get some bread.
Yeah?
Yeah, so there's one thing before we get to the kingdom that I did want to address about the previous episode on cycling. Wandering Winder, who is a bro, gave a very long reply about some of the numbers that I had used, and by some, well, just one of them. I was talking about if you open Silverware House and you want to hit 5 and shuffle it in, you have a 29% chance of that. And he pointed out that really it's a 26% chance because I can't do math. But also, that number isn't entirely a fair comparison to make. You can't really compare that number to 100% because there's a 2 in 12 shot that whatever you bought isn't going to make the shuffle anyway, and it didn't matter what you got, right?
Okay, so it's still, your number is still right, it's just not accounting for... Yeah, it's the other thing that wasn't even contingent on.
Yeah, it's not really giving the full picture,
okay.
right? And it's also, I don't think I did a good enough job of making it clear that it was that narrow situation that the math applied to. So, I did allude to the fact that, yes, there are some other things you care about. The possibility of hitting 6, the possibility of hitting 5 twice, even the possibility of hitting 7. Maybe these are things you care more about, and it really depends on a lot of things, and really what I wanted to do is to get you thinking about, what are the things that can possibly happen. And it also doesn't account for the fact of, how far ahead are you if you manage to play your warehouse turn 3 and hit it. So, obviously a lot more goes into that decision, and, if you want to see the math, go check it out. Wandering Winder has a very long post with numbers that I don't believe are garbage, like mine. But yeah, check out the forums. You can go to adamhorton.com. There are links there that'll get you to the forums. You can check that out. But also, really what I want is for you to just be thinking through what's going to happen in certain cases. Try not to get caught up with numbers. Try not to get caught up with any garbage that people are going to try and tell you about stuff. Really what's important is how it's going to work out for you and what the chances of good things and bad things are and what you really want.
Yeah, and I actually think this is really telling of something that I firmly believe to be one of the biggest steps you can take as a player to really upping your game is to, listen to advice, read rules, and read things that tend to be good together and stuff like that, but also remember that all the context matters all of the time, and no two games of Dominion are the same. Yeah. We have these general rules, but do not put yourself on autopilot. Don't just hear Adam's argument that Silver Warehouse is bad and assume that that's always true. There are going to be a lot of cases where any rule you hear has too many exceptions to be applied.
Sure. You want to... There's going to come a point in your Dominion life where you have to question what other people are telling you in order to get better.
Sure.
And there's one level where you question it, where it's like just understanding why they're telling you these things. And then there's another level that like, well, maybe they're not completely right in this situation because X. And then there's another level where it's like, maybe I don't agree with them in these kinds of situations. And like, this is what's going to make you a better Dominion player. When you're up against someone who you think is better than you, and they're doing a thing, and you're like, I think I can do better.
Yeah.
Like, that's the most satisfying win I've ever had in Dominion was that.
Yeah.
And, like, not only is it satisfying to have that accomplishment, but, like, it's just a sign that, like, hey, you are becoming a better player, and also, like, you know, I also got better at the game through that game, too. So, like, yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Anyway, that's all I had on the non-kingdom specific stuff.
Yeah, sure.
You want to read some cards to us, Jake?
Yeah, so the kingdom that we played this week and got pretty familiar with was talking about cycling last time, which isn't really something you can get into with any card in particular. So we kind of just rolled a random kingdom and played it. And the result of that was Beggar, Gear, Guide, Swindler, Fortress, Salvager, Scavenger, Catacombs, Margrave, Royal Carriage, and we had a landmark, Defiled Shrine. I'm going to read that once more for our audio-only listeners. We had Beggar, Gear, Guide, Swindler, Fortress, Salvager, Scavenger, Catacombs, Margrave, Royal Carriage, and Defiled Shrine.
Yeah, so I think both of us agreed on a Salvager Swindler opening for 4-3.
Yeah.
On 5-2, I think I said you want to open Salvager nothing, and I don't remember if you agreed with that.
I think I said Margrave, especially if you went first.
Yeah, I stand by the Salvager. I thought so back then, and I was not swayed.
Having played it out, and we both got 5-2s and 3-4s plenty, I think that Adam's right. You do just bite the bullet and get Salvager nothing, because the Salvager is so important here.
Yeah, so like I think this speaks to the concept of cycling. So like yeah, your long-term goal is to build a deck that draws itself and then salvages fortresses a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you want to get your deck. And so thinning is very important. Salvager is the only way to thin, and it also kind of helps to mitigate what's going on with Swindler if your opponent chooses to go for that.
Yeah.
So like Salvager is by far the most important card to be playing as soon as possible, as often as possible, and even later on, you know, it's part of your payload. Like Salvager, you just want to play the stupid thing so many times, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and like part of the reason it's so important to do that early is that like building that deck that salvages Fortress is great, but like you need to also get to the point where salvaging the fortresses is even a good idea. Because like if you're looking at a hand early on and you happen to collide Salvager Fortress, but there's an estate in your hand, you're kind of silly to salvage the fortress in that context.
Sure.
You should just get thin the estate or the copper or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the copper's more iffy, but
Thin the stupid copper. Get out of here. Unless you're drawing everything.
well, yeah, or if you're like gonna hit like a price point you really want and thinning the copper causes you not to do that, then it's contextual.
Okay, fine. That's a little iffy, but thinning the copper is so important. It's a tough call.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like Salvager, that's the best card in your deck. You want to play as much as possible. And so this concept of cycling is, what are the tools I have available to me that will allow me to play the best card, Salvager, as often as possible?
Yeah.
And they're here, right? Scavenger can help you play it more often.
Mm-hmm.
Guide can help you play it more often. And Royal Carriage can help you play it more often. And then just in general deck control, drawing a lot of cards can help you play it more often.
Yeah, so it comes in the form of like Catacombs and Margrave along with your fortresses.
Yeah.
Sometimes kind of Gear too, but like that's less good than these other things that we were talking about.
It is, yeah. Like, I mean, if you drew it dead with a Gear, then it's not as bad as if you drew it dead with something else. But at the same time, like, playing a Gear, other than the fact that it just draws cards and helps you get a Salvager in your hand, is not directly responsible for more plays of the card Salvager, right?
Yeah.
And so there are different ways you can do it. There's the churning of Scavenger along with placing the Salvager on top. That's pretty good. And Guide is certainly good for helping you churn and filter through bad hands and get back to your Salvager. So if I have a hand with no Salvager, I can call a Guide and then maybe I'll get one, right? But I think by far the most effective one in this case was Royal Carriage.
Yeah. I actually had an interesting thought about that, and that's that during our cycling episode, it seemed like when you talked about Royal Carriage's cycling, that was the easiest one to argue with or the easiest one to question, right? Because it's harder to understand why are we calling that cycling, because it doesn't really fit what a lot of people are thinking of as cycling, which is moving cards around. It's not doing that. But if you think about the effect of cycling, which is the in a productive manner, which is playing something like your Salvager more times, Royal Carriage is doing exactly that. It's doing the same thing, so does it matter mechanically what's going on?
It achieves that effect. I think the way you play around it is slightly nuanced because it kind of fits in that spamming bucket, right?
Sure.
Each Royal Carriage you add to your deck, when you plan to call it on a Salvager, is kind of like another copy of Salvager, only it gives you an action along with it effectively. Yeah. And then also there's this kind of synergy where, if I find my Salvager with a bunch of bad cards and I have a bunch of Carriages on my mat, I can use Salvager and Carriage is like a bad chapel, right? So you can do that, and it's kind of nice because, this hand is going to suck anyway because I'm going to trash down to 2 coppers. Oh, wait, I have more Carriage. So, it fits in the spamming bucket, and so that educates your decision on how you're going to build your deck around it. And in this case, you get a Salvager, and then you just get a bunch of Royal Carriages until you feel like you can draw your deck, or most of it, by adding maybe a Margrave or a Catacombs.
Yeah.
And you get one of those, and then you just keep hitting the Royal Carriages.
I think that somewhere in the middle, you definitely add a Margrave to your deck, though.
Yeah, at some point, you get a Margrave, and then at another point, you get another Catacombs. Or you get a Catacombs, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you want some more draw.
There was definitely a lot of reading as well on the tactical state of things based on what has happened with Swindler. The Swindler... I actually was kind of smirking when we talked about Swindler as a defense to Fortress, because I didn't think that was, a legitimate concern. I was like, okay, you're not going to hit Fortresses with Swindler that often. But if your opponent thins and has a bunch of Fortresses in their deck, actually, with the kind of deck you're building here, Fortress was a legitimate defense to Swindler. In the early game, if your opponent has played Swindlers on you, bad things can have happened to you. I remember at one point I had thinned a bunch of coppers and, hit my golden rule of, not going below the capacity to buy a silver. I didn't get below the payload I wanted, but then he swindled my coppers out, and it set me way back because I was out of payload in my deck.
Or if my Royal Carriages just magically turn into duchies 2 or 3 at a time.
I may or may not have been responsible for that.
I'm a little salty about that. Whatever.
One time he swindled my Margrave and I forgot about it, so he didn't get Margrave that turn because I was.
Or the next 2 or 3 turns until I reminded you.
He didn't. I forgot Margrave was even theoretically a part of the kingdom because it was just gone.
I had checked the box of buy 1 Margrave, and now I don't need to think about this anymore. Good job, man.
Yeah, no, that was great.
I guess I should have kept my mouth shut.
And of course, the Defiled Shrine points came into play fairly often because there were means to deal with those curses, and we had a lot of plus buys.
Yeah,
so,
the extra buys.
You usually didn't sacrifice buying a card to get a curse in the points, but if there are 6 or 7 points sitting there, maybe even 5, and you have an extra buy, it was kind of a all right, this is worth it moment.
That seems about right.
Yeah, it gave you some endgame flexibility. It meant that you could be a little more. If you got a point lead that way, it means it's not just the points, right? It's also the fact that the piles can get down to 2, and your opponent can't just 3-pile and win because they have these points to deal with that you have. So.
Yeah, the analogy of denying the points to your opponent is.
Dubious.
It's dubious. I think it's slightly less dubious in this kingdom. There are a finite number of points, and I think the VP tokens manage to vacate all of the piles except for Beggar pretty consistently.
Except for that time Dan Brooks made you play Fortress Big Money.
Yeah. Just watch the video. That was pretty funny. That game was a lot closer than it should have been.
Oh yeah, I played like garbage, but I still won by a lot.
Yeah. So like, there's a certain number of points, and you kind of don't want to let your opponent get all of them, even if it means just grabbing a curse or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this was definitely a pretty fun kingdom to play too. If you guys set it up yourselves, there's a lot of play and counterplay here, so I think that you could definitely have some fun playing it.
Yeah, if you don't mind Swindler all that much.
Yeah, right. And a lot of people do. But I actually think that Swindler is fine here. I think it has a legitimate, like, tactical application.
It's not as bad as it normally is.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Salvager kind of undoes the damage that Swindler does, but it's still annoying.
And the Fortress defense, it feels so good when it happens for you.
Oh, yeah.
Your opponent plays a Swindler and you draw a card and gain a 4 cost. It's just...
Mwah. Yeah, so good. A+, primo.
Yeah, yeah, so we were going to get into Rebuild today.
Yeah.
This is a card a lot of people have some strong feelings on.
Oh, my favorite lunch meat is Rebuilding Lunch Meat. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah, so Rebuild's not the most popular card out there. I
Yeah.
actually don't... I mean, I carry it in my IRL box, but it's not, like, ready to play with.
A lot of people despise it, actually.
I mean...
I used to be one of them, I will
It's-
say. I'm not anymore.
I
but-
dislike it enough that I currently have it on my ban list for online play, which I'm thinking about changing.
Mhm.
But I certainly don't play with it IRL.
Yeah, so there is I want to give a shout out to a really fantastic article on Rebuild that Adam has linked on his Reddit. And after reading that, it inspired a lot of my ideas of what we're going to talk about here today. And I don't remember who actually wrote that article.
So it's one I linked from my blog.
Yeah.
It was written by AI, and She Can't Say No.
Okay.
Which, I mean, they played a lot of games of Rebuild mirrors, and it's definitely focused on the mirror. And there's a section when we get into mirrors, and I'm gonna address a little bit more of the detail. But like, I call out 3 articles on that list of articles as being excellent, and this is one of them.
You should definitely give it a read because we're actually going to be going over a lot of the same things today, but they have a lot of detail that we're not going to be able to go into in this format. So definitely do give it a read.
So let me read out the text on this bad boy. So Rebuild is a $5 action from the Dark Ages expansion. Gives you +1 action. It says name a card. Reveal cards from your deck until you reveal a victory card you did not name. You discard the rest, trash the victory card, gain a victory card costing up to 3 more than it. So, like, the base case is you name Province or Colony if it's a colony game, and then you find a crappier victory card and you turn it into the next best one. You dig through your deck until you find it, and then you turn it into the next best one.
Yeah.
And, as we said, it's not the most popular card, and I think that comes down to 2 facets. Number one, it's really powerful. But it's powerful in a non-interactive way. It's less interactive than what a good powerful card should be.
And the other thing about its power level that might be kind of frustrating to be on either end of it, receiving or giving, is that it's super inflexible and there's not a lot of variance in what it does. It kind of does the same or something similar every time it wins games.
From a conceptual standpoint, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at it real close and...
right.
see differences. But so, like, I mean, there are multiple points in my mind that support the powerful and the non-interactive, and I think they can provide some insight into how you do good stuff with this card. So, like, Rebuild, I think, is powerful mainly because it's very fast, right? You can end the game very quickly. Mm-hmm. By depleting the province pile, by milling provinces out of it. Trash a province, gain a province.
Remember, the trashing on Rebuild says up to, not exactly. So just because you trash a province doesn't mean you can't gain it right back.
Yeah, so like you're not hurting your point total, but you're decreasing the number of points available for your opponent. And Rebuild can actually do this pretty quickly. So like it effectively denies points for them to catch up by removing provinces from the supply, and also duchies, because like you start with estates and then they become duchies, and the duchies end up in the trash. So like it's pretty hard to play against this kind of thing because the normal tools you have for competing with strategies that are monolithic and inflexible are not nearly as effective against rebuild.
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about rebuild, it's kind of important to note that it's kind of two separate cards. Like rebuild, if your opponent is not playing around rebuild like you are, or not playing as strong into it as you are, plays completely differently, and than if you are playing it in a mirror match. So let's talk about why it's so effective against anything else, and why if you play rebuild and your opponent doesn't, I don't know what's in the rest of the kingdom, but I can probably tell you you're going to lose. Did I say that wrong?
What do you...
I'm saying, like, if you play rebuild and your opponent doesn't, they're going to lose.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
Did I say it the other way?
Yeah.
Sweet.
It's all good, bro.
But yeah.
Yeah, rebuild's really good. Normally, they need to have something very fast to keep up with it. So I see a lot of people, they play a rebuild strat, and their opponent's not going for rebuild, and they play it like a mirror, and it's really not good.
No.
It's very different. Rebuild, when it's uncontested, it really focuses on ending the game quickly.
Right.
And a lot of the things that non-rebuild strategies can do to stop that from happening and win games are not effective. So the two main ones, I think, are attacks and other sources of VP.
Yeah. So
attacks they're less effective. Attacks can still hurt rebuild. If rebuild likes to hit 5, so it can buy rebuilds and maybe duchies. And, if I play a militia on the rebuild player, that's harder for them to hit 5. That's a thing.
Right, but the concept of attacks slowing down a strategy usually is implying that you play an attack like a militia, and the turn that you played that attack, it stops them from advancing toward their win condition. Or at least they can't buy a province that turn, or do whatever it is they're doing, because you played the attack. That doesn't happen to rebuild.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to get that to happen at the very least. Because all they have to do is play one action card.
Yeah.
And now a province is gone from the supply.
So you're not going to outpace it, because once they have the points total that they want, the rebuild player, and that's usually just 3 provinces. They usually level their estates up into provinces, and then they just end the game. And once they do that, 1 or more provinces are going to be leaving the pile every turn, and there's nothing really you can do about that.
Yeah, you have to outrace that, and that's usually really fast.
Yeah.
And attacks aren't really going to stop that from happening. It'll slow it down a bit, but not nearly as much as attacks will be effective against some other strategy that isn't rebuilt.
Yeah. I could see, if there is a kind of attack that's going to hurt it, I could see it being like a trashing attack. Like, if you're playing something like Knights, or if you get the attack from, Rogue off enough, and you trash some of their key. Although Rogue is an excellent rebuild enabler.
Rogue is a bad card, though, so...
Yeah, right. So, but if you could trash... their key duchy or their rebuilds or what have you, that could slow them down a bit.
Yeah, you'd have to get kind of lucky, but sure.
Yeah, that's a huge risk to go for that.
You have to play a lot of knights super fast. I mean, that's still really hard to do.
Yeah, and we're if you take anything from this, we're reaching to figure out how to stop a rebuild deck.
You really need to outrace it.
Yeah, and you're probably not going to.
That's hard.
So you should probably just play rebuild if rebuild's available.
Yeah, I'm sort of coming around on that idea, but I mean, it's hard to outrace rebuild, and that's kind of what you have to do. And then I just wanted to put a bow on this. We talked about why attacks aren't as effective. Other methods of scoring points are not really as effective because they kind of assume that you have a lot of time. And rebuild can just mill the provinces anyway. So the fact that you could score more points if you have more time isn't really relevant because you don't have more time.
Yeah, you think about something that usually beats out everything else, like Vineyard. Vineyard, a lot of, you usually just build the big action spammy deck just because Vineyard is so many points, but Rebuild absolutely outpaces it before it gets there. Yeah. So the more, I think, nuanced and plentiful discussion centers around how Rebuild would work in a mirror, though. Right?
Depending on your definition of nuanced, I guess. I think it's different. Jake clearly likes it more than I do, but, you know.
So, like, both people need to know how to play the Rebuild mirror for it to hold that kind of weight, right? But if they do, there's actually kind of a set dance, and there are 3 phases to the game, and they are defined by, you know, your priorities during them. And the first phase of the game is just the early game where both players are trying to hit 5 as early and often as possible and get as many rebuilds as possible. And you will know that that phase has come to an end, and we get to the Duchy Rush, which is the mid-game. Because if both players are centering their strategy around rebuild, then duchies become the most important pile in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to get provinces without duchies if you're using rebuild.
Yeah.
So if the duchies are gone, you have big problems. And so denying that to your opponent can be very strong if you have all the duchies. It doesn't really matter if your deck is bad. At least it can score points, and that's not that way for your opponent, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, if both people are playing with rebuild, they're both building decks that don't make a lot of money or do anything else really but play the rebuilds. So the idea that your opponent's going to buy a province out from under you is really, really reaching.
Yeah, it's
So if you get more duchies, you probably get more provinces too.
So if you lose the duchy split, that is kind of your recourse, right? You want to try and get some treasures so that you can maybe get a province. Right?
Yeah.
And that feels really bad because that's hard to do, and you have to get lucky.
It's an uphill battle. So with that in mind, you know that you've exited the beginning of a rebuild game and entered the mid-game one of 2 ways. One, the rebuild pile runs out.
Oh, boy. I don't think I've ever seen that happen in a rebuild mirror.
I have seen it happen before. I think it means that somebody didn't take an opportunity they have. Number 2, in the starter pistol for the mid game of a typical rebuild game, is somebody gets to 5 and instead of buying a rebuild, they buy a duchy to get ahead on that split.
Yeah, I think
once that happens, you have to start matching pace with them.
I think that usually happens around 2, maybe 3 rebuilds. Like, the idea is you've got 3 estates, they should be duchies, and you should have 0 estates left.
Yeah.
And you want to buy duchies so that you can still rebuild all of your estates, and at the end of it, you have more than 4 duchies. So you want to buy 1 duchy, maybe 2. And if you buy 2, you could be in good shape, because maybe they didn't get to rebuild all their estates.
Yeah, right.
So you either want to stick them with an estate and or have more duchies than them.
And there's also some danger to not playing against the clock here, because if they do get to the point where the duchy pile starts to dwindle and you have any cards that are sub-duchy, like estates, you're in trouble. Because you only get to name 1 card with rebuilds, so it makes it so that when your rebuilds have a chance to trash a card and do nothing for you. And your pit ceiling is low, so losing a green card out of your deck is potentially game decisive.
Well, I mean, you're not necessarily losing the card, because, like, let's say you trash an estate. You're still going to get an estate back.
Sure.
But that's just an estate that your rebuilds can trip on, and now they're not making your duchies become provinces.
Right.
Like, you're still going to be naming province, or maybe you're going to be stuck naming estate and then milling a province if it doesn't work out. Maybe that's better for you, depending on what you're likely to hit.
Yeah.
But this is still not a very good situation to be in, because the guy who doesn't have estates left can just name province, and then every rebuild play is turning a duchy into a province. And eventually they're going to have more points than you. Like, you're going to have to find some other way to get more points. So that's either buying treasures and hoping to buy one of the provinces, or like magically milling so many provinces they don't get the chance to do that. No, that never works.
That's not going to happen.
And then the article advocates for this estate blitz thing, which I think is dubious. It's the one part of the article that I'd be a little more skeptical about. I don't think buying lots of estates is ever good.
I think there are some situations where I have seen the estate blitz decide a game even though a player had actually won the duchy split. I actually, on my YouTube channel, just posted a game where I was playing Rebuild, and I came out ahead, I believe, in the duchy split, and somehow lost the game to my opponent piling estates on me. So it can happen, and if you want to see it happen, you know where to find me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be a fun game to watch. Yeah, so like in these rebuild mirrors, like what kind of support are you looking for? We said that rebuild isn't the most interactive card.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I think most of the support that comes with rebuild, most of it, is just stuff that helps you play rebuild more often.
Sure.
So, cycling, hey!
Yeah, hey, remember we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
And we're here again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, cycling, things like Scavenger, Warehouse, the usual suspects when we think of cycling,
and
those are great.
This, by the way, applies to both versions of the rebuild game, whether or not you're being mirrored.
That's true. I think it's more true in the mirror, but certainly that is true. I guess there is a small distinction to make. So, like, one part of cycling, right, is deck control.
Yeah.
And that comes in the form of thinning and draw, along with all the other stuff we talked about. But I think thinning and draw are a little less effective for rebuild.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, they need to cost less than 5, because if they cost 5 or more...
it could have been a rebuild.
Could have been a rebuild.
Yeah.
Or maybe a duchy. Like, normally there's just not time for that, because going straight for rebuilds is too freaking strong. But in the mirror... trashing estates, I think, gets a little bit better than it does in the non-mirror.
Yeah.
And also, there needs to not be a huge opportunity cost for getting the trashing. So, I'm really looking at Moneylender. Moneylender gets the coppers out of the way, so you can play your stuff more often. Still helps you at 5. I think Salvager is pretty good in the mirror. That helps you hit 5, and it helps you play your rebuilds more often. And it can clean up those pesky estates that you don't want to be stuck with.
Yeah, I think that's only in the mirror that you make that consideration.
Correct. I think that's true.
So a couple of things. First off, if you pretty much no variant of the rebuild strategy, I think, wants to buy estates, unless it's like a desperation call at the end. Like, buying an estate to eventually turn it into a duchy and then a province, that's extremely ambitious.
In a mirror, I'm pretty sure it's never right.
It's never going to happen. And buying an estate to maybe turn it into a duchy is probably the wrong call. Like, in that case, I think you buy a silver, right? Because then that makes your deck more likely to be able to straight up buy a duchy, which is more points anyway.
Yeah, I guess, there are some situations where, I could see it, because, like, I'm not going to say it's impossible. It is a calculated risk, because, like, let's say I buy an estate this turn, and I believe that I can rebuild it into a duchy next turn. I've tracked my deck. I know I have a rebuild coming up, and all my other estates are duchies, right? So this is a way I can effectively buy a duchy, because I know I'm playing a rebuild.
All right, that's fair.
Then
sure.
if you think there's going to be a duchy left for you next turn, then yes, like, go for it. It's definitely good for you. But it's still kind of risky, because if the duchies are gone, oops, I have this estate that I didn't want. LOL.
Yeah. And, in a non-mirror, I don't think you really trash estates either.
I don't think you trash estates. I could see maybe buying one estate.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessary is the thing. It's
Probably
not that it's bad. It's that if you're not being mirrored in a rebuild game, you are probably better off not having the estate and just ending the game that much faster, because you're hitting your provinces more often.
Yeah, so like if you buy an estate and you rebuild it into a province, that's now 2 plays of rebuild that it takes to remove a province from the supply. And at some point, your win condition, if you're playing rebuild uncontested, is to remove all of the provinces from the supply. So now you have to play an extra rebuild.
I think a clean rebuild game that wasn't contested wins with exactly 18 points, and then the game's over. before your opponent gets to do anything.
Yeah, I think there's some cases where it's 24, but like, yeah, those are kind of rare. Like,
Yeah.
it's either 18 or 24, and I think it's 18 most of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the provinces are in the trasharoonie.
Yeah. If your opponent's doing something that is scoring a lot of points in quickly, I could see buying the odd duchy here and there. Sure.
You like buying a state or a duchy. I could see that being okay.
Yeah.
Like buying a duchy in a rebuild game.
That's much
to
better.
rebuild into a province like that doesn't set you back nearly as much as an estate. So that you can get 4 provinces that way, and that
Plus,
makes sense.
if the game's over and the duchy's still in your deck, it's not nothing, right? I mean, that's part of the points total that you have at the end of the game.
For sure. I mean, most of the time, I would say you just want to spam rebuilds.
Yeah.
If you're uncontested. This is something I wanted to say like 10 or 15 times in this episode. Like, if you are doing rebuild uncontested, don't play it like it's a mirror, man.
It's
like,
not, right.
I've seen a lot of people lose games that way.
Yeah, because like the rebuild does have some weaknesses. The problem is that if it's played properly, those weaknesses don't cause it to lose games. The weaknesses of a rebuild deck are low payload in the traditional sense. It doesn't make money, really. It doesn't draw cards, and its point ceiling is really low at the end of the game. It's not going to have very many points. That doesn't cause it to lose games if they play it correctly, but those are things that will cause a more traditional deck, whatever else is in the kingdom, to beat it if the rebuild player wastes his time.
Sure. I mean, they have to capitalize on the idea that you're playing an action card, and that action card means you gain a province.
Yeah.
Even if you have to trash one. But, small price to pay.
Yeah, so that's kind of the differences between how you play a rebuild and a mirror versus an uncontested rebuild.
So, I think there's a couple of other ways of supporting rebuild.
Yeah.
In a mirror, Rogue and Grave Robber, things that can gain duchies from the trash.
Yeah.
Kind of changes things. Because now, when the duchies are gone from the supply, that's not the end of the story, right? Your rebuilds can still be good if you can gain duchies from the trash.
Yeah, there are very few things that alter the script of a rebuild mirror that make a different play the optimal one, and Rogue and Grave Robber are up there.
Yeah, so there's Rogue and Grave Robber. There's also Duke and Distant Lands. They're victory cards that cost 5, and that's why they're important.
Yeah, it's not because of what they do. It's because they're an extra duchy pile.
In the Distant Lands case, I would say that's true. There is something to playing Rebuild Duke, especially when you're not contested. But,
okay,
it's not trivial to play Rebuild Duke. I think there's a couple words about it in the article. It's not the normal blast through the duchy pile, though. Mm-hmm. Distant Lands and Duke, those change, and then there's also Tunnel.
Yeah.
Rebuild Tunnel kind of have a special interaction, and I think normally when it's Rebuild Tunnel, the strongest thing is just to flood yourself with gold by turning your estates into tunnels and naming Tunnel a few times.
You name Tunnel whenever you...
Yeah, so you flood with gold, and at that point, you're aiming to buy provinces because you have a buttload of gold in your deck.
Yeah.
And then, eventually you rebuild the tunnels into provinces too, because why not? Because I have rebuilds and tunnels in my deck, and what else am I going to do with my life besides buy provinces? That's typically pretty good. So, I think those are the main exceptions that are going to turn this whole rebuild mirror paradigm, or rebuild in general paradigm, on its head. Those are the only things, I think, in the entire game that are strong enough to support the way rebuild, or to really change the way that rebuild plays.
Yeah, and it's also, so those are the things that do. There are some things also in Dominion that look like they would and don't.
You want to count them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So estates being shelters instead.
Oh yeah. That doesn't. It turns out that doesn't matter. Oops.
Yeah.
Seems like it would, but
No,
LOL.
You don't have these estates, but you've got your overgrown estate that can become one, and then you just buy silvers and eventually duchies.
You buy a duchy,
and then
trash the hovel, whatever.
The rebuild game proceeds as normal from there.
It doesn't matter.
It's
Oops.
it's no less powerful than it is.
Whoopsie doodles.
Yeah. You might think, as well that the extra building potential from Platinum and Colony could outpace a rebuild player eventually.
Well, I mean, it changes the way rebuild plays.
Yeah.
You have to play 3 more rebuilds to end the game.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Whoops. GG.
Yeah, because you can still empty the provinces if you have to. It means that the rebuild player can like look at where the points are and decide what to name from there. Now, there isn't no skill to a rebuild game, to a rebuild deck. You do have to remember which green cards are in your deck at any given time.
That's pretty important.
Yeah, I have had more than one game where I've lost because I play a rebuild and name a card that like name the only green card in my deck, and the effect of rebuild was I put my deck in my discard pile. All right, your move, guy.
Your move, guy.
I did that on
like
purpose.
Guy Fieri?
Yeah, I did that on purpose so I could see what was in my deck.
I really, you know what? Now that I think about it, like, I would kind of like to play Dominion against Guy Fieri.
Yeah,
because like, oh my god, I can't believe you said that. I'm gonna bleep that out. That was terrible. Yeah, the wife and I are not the biggest fans of Guy Fieri, and I would just like to beat him at Dominion. I'd really like to think I could beat Guy Fieri at Dominion.
Yeah. I mean...
That hair.
He could be really good. What if...
You ever seen him, like, take his sunglasses and put them on the back of his head upside down? Like, who does that? Guy Fieri, obviously, but...
I wonder if, like, you know, somebody on the top 20 leaderboard is secretly Guy Fieri.
So, Guy Fieri, if you're listening to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast...
Gloves are off.
Give us a shout out. I welcome the challenge.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So the last thing I wanted to say is count gains duchies, and that turns out that doesn't really help. No. It gains them from the supply, and if you're hitting 5, you're probably better off either buying a duchy or buying a rebuild. Oops.
What good thing is honestly count going to do for you? You'd probably the best thing it would be is the money, right? Or, I mean, gaining the duchy is fine if you can do it, but it's probably just going to
buy a rebuild.
Right. So
okay.
you probably didn't buy the count in the first place.
Sweet. Excelente, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing, and I actually haven't seen this play out, I would be curious to see if anybody has made this work. I was wondering if Salt the Earth with plus buy and enough to get multiple of them a turn could hamstring a rebuild deck by being able to play around trashing the duchy pile before the rebuild player really gets his hands into it.
I don't think so, man.
But then the rebuild player has Salt the Earth as well to be able to trash out provinces faster. So
Salt the Earth can end the game very fast.
Yeah.
And you're gonna want some points when you do that, and rebuild's really good at getting you points quickly.
And then ending the game.
So rebuild seems especially good in that game.
Yeah,
Salt the Earth.
I have to confess I've never played a game that had rebuild in Salt the Earth. It's just something I've always been wondering about.
Well,
waiting to randomly roll into one of my kingdoms.
I'm sure that I've played a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure. So there's we've talked about some of the things that support rebuild. I want to just acknowledge a few things out there that don't.
Sure.
Really support rebuilds. So, I said it's non-interactive, and we talked about most of the support revolving around playing more rebuilds. Why is it that rebuild as a payload in some deck that does other things is not as good as the less interactive deck that just aims to spam playing rebuilds? So, let's say you want to have deck control. Right, as a form of cycling, as a form of playing more rebuilds more often. And usually this is going to result in a more interactive deck because you can play rebuild and maybe do some other stuff. And it turns out that doesn't work very well for rebuild because if you're going to draw a bunch of cards, then you're going to have your rebuild in hand, but you're also going to have the thing you wanted to rebuild in hand. Yeah. So you have to find some way to set up my rebuilds in my hand and my rebuild targets are not in my hand. Yeah. And that's pain.
So straight up drawing a bunch of cards, even if you have actions after, it isn't really good for a rebuild-centered strategy.
Yeah, just drawing the cards isn't so great for them. Also, if you can draw a bunch of cards, and you're comparing, you have this fiver that's rebuild, and maybe it could have been something else. So so there's that opportunity cost of the rebuild that can be pretty high. And another thing that's baked into the opportunity cost of rebuild is you probably didn't want to trash your estates. And trashing your estates is really good for decks that want to draw a lot of cards and do lots of things.
Right.
So if that deck is going to be online in time to really accomplish anything, chances are rebuild's not a very good fit for it. Now, that said, I have made it work. I played, maybe 100 or 200 games of rebuild before I decided I was done. And I did manage to make it work one time. Terminal space was super tight. Discarding a green card was kind of already happening and something I wanted to do anyway, so that wasn't there. But, you're also competing with other rebuild strats or whatever else is going on. And it's sort of rare to see these two things go together. So that goes back to the non-interactive portion of rebuild. Like, I either want to build a deck that focuses on spamming rebuilds and just doing that, or I'm going to be doing something else that rebuild doesn't fit that well into. And I think it's rare that you're going to find a deck that wants to do them both.
Yeah, rebuild really isn't a card that will complement a strategy as much as it formulates one. It kind of is all or nothing. You're playing a rebuild deck or you are not. You really don't want to put rebuild into any other kind of deck.
Yeah. And then I think the other type of support that rebuild does like is stuff that just helps you hit 5 in a deck that you put rebuilds in. And rebuild is a card that makes you $0.
Silver's really good at hitting 5.
Silver's quite good.
Yeah.
It's up there.
So a lot of time on a rebuild board,
you get silvers.
Open silver.
Yeah, you get some silvers. It's pretty good.
Yeah, there you go. So terminal silvers, you might have one of those because it's a silver that does some other thing.
Yeah,
yes!
That could happen.
It's amazing as long as it doesn't cost 5.
And hey, maybe if that other thing it does helps you play more rebuilds, you could be in good shape there.
Or if it's a swindler and it attacks your opponent, it's fine too.
Everyone loves Swindler. It's super great.
Yeah, so the other card that actually synergizes really well with rebuild, not because it's a victory card, but because it helps you hit 5 so easily, is Mill. And you look at Mill and you're like, oh, it's interacting with rebuild because it's great. No, it's helping you hit 5. That's all it's doing.
Yeah, like Horse Traders is a cleaner example, but Mill certainly gets the job done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm opening Mill all day on a rebuild game. And eventually, like, if it's a mirror and it's important that I'm able to turn all my duchies into provinces, then yes, I'm going to sacrifice the Mill to the rebuild gods, and that's fine. But I still think you're better off opening with the Mill because you'll be able to rebuild it before it's too late,
Yeah.
I certainly don't think that you're going to be sad having that in your deck. And also, Mill's not terrible at transitioning into big money rebuild. So even if it doesn't work out for you, if you get a gold and you collide it with a Mill, you're probably getting a province. You can just discard rebuilds and buy a province. It's fine. You can do it.
As difficult as it kind of is to hit province in a rebuild game, the reward is quite high too because the rebuild player's goal, his end game is turning a duchy into a province, which nets him 3 points. So buying 6 points is a splash of points that like a full-on rebuild deck really doesn't have access to.
Yeah, like you had used the term point ceiling before.
Yeah.
And I think that's appropriate here. If you buy a province, that kind of breaks that whole thing. Normally, rebuild games are decided when the duchy pile is gone. There's very little that players can do to affect that afterwards, or they have to get very lucky. But, if they do, it's quite good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so let us know if you feel like you have some kind of other interaction with Rebuild that you feel like we missed. Let me know if you feel like you disagree with some of the stuff that we've been saying about Rebuild.
There is one thing that I disagree with that we've said. I don't feel like we've said this one point enough. If you're being mirrored in Rebuild, don't play it like you're not being mirrored, or vice versa. If you're being mirrored, focus down the duchy pile and try to get your estates out. If you're not being mirrored, mill provinces, end the game as quick as possible. I think that's the most important point we can make.
Yeah, if we were going to TLDR it, those are the cliff notes of the podcast, and if you just take that information into your Rebuild games, you're going to have an edge on somebody who doesn't understand that conceptually, definitely.
Making Luck, a Cliff's Notes podcast.
Yeah, so we're going to be playing a kingdom this week that has Rebuild in it, which means that we're going to be playing more Rebuild games over this next week than Adam has played in the last several years, I'm sure.
Can't wait, man.
So yeah, he's excited about that.
Hey, you want me to read you some cards?
I'd love to.
Some bready cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have Beggar.
Again.
He's so good. Faithful Hound, Gladiator, Guide, Hermit, Oracle, Distant Lands, Explorer, Rebuild, Swamp Hag, and we have Tax and Ball. Also, there will be shelters this game. Once again, for our audio-only listeners, Beggar, Faithful Hound, Gladiator, Guide, Hermit, Oracle, Distant Lands, Explorer, Rebuild, Swamp Hag, and there's Tax and Ball, and we have shelters this game. Yeah, so like there's no village here other than the necropolis, so they're like there's no draw. I mean, there's Madman, but no.
Hey. Well, let's think about this. All right. You put a bunch of Faithful Hounds in your deck. You play Rebuild. You discard the Faithful Hounds. They go into your hand next turn.
Okay.
You get all the Faithful Hounds into your hand. They do nothing. And then you...
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Seems pretty cool.
If we get Lost Arts in here...
that would change some stuff, yeah.
But yeah, so...
good call, man.
Yeah, there's really nothing to do here that centers around drawing a bunch of cards, right?
Yeah. Your options that aren't Rebuild are pretty limited.
Yeah.
So I think you probably have to go for some Rebuild stuff, yeah?
Yeah, so the one of little point of contention we had was whether or not it was valid to open with a Hermit here.
Yeah, so like, I mean...
We've got the shelters, so I can see it a little more clearly here. If it were states, I'd say no.
I kind of like... I certainly think opening Hermit is better than not opening with a Hermit. I think that's pretty clear to me. In a mirror, the Hermit is going to be useful for getting your estates or shelters out. It's going to help you hit 5 more. It's going to make sure you don't get stuck with those later on. It's going to gain you guides, which will help get you back to your rebuilds more often. Skip over bad hands, which is a big deal for rebuild.
Yeah.
Also, if your opponent decides to go for Swamp Hags, it gets rid of the curses, and you just super don't care. You can spam this thing, gain lots of guides. It's just fine.
Yeah, and that's all valid.
I like the Hermit.
Especially for getting rid of the shelters, definitely. That's the main thing I see it doing for me, gaining the guides and silvers. I don't actually know if I would gain guide too often, as opposed to silver. Because
really?
Yeah, if I'm playing a deck that focuses on rebuild, I am going to be wanting to aim to buying that clutch duchy at some point. And
there's distant lands here, man. There's no such thing as a clutch duchy. Hashtag clutch duchy. Hashtag clutchy.
Whoa. And my big question was, do you think Sea Hag plays a part, or Swamp Hag plays a part here?
I don't think I would get it. I don't think it hurts the rebuild player all that much. Because, like, they just don't have to buy a card.
Do you think it helps the rebuild player? Because...
it costs 5.
In a mirror.
So, no.
Well, so in a mirror...
costs 5, so no.
But it's really good at hitting province.
You know what else is good at hitting province? Buying a duchy and playing a rebuild.
Yeah, okay, but like that's less points than just buying a province.
Really?
So, yeah.
Buying a duchy and playing a rebuild is still 6 points.
That's fewer points per turn, right? That's 3 points per turn as opposed to 6 points when you just buy it. Look, I'm just saying that if you find yourself in the position where if you're in a 4-4 duchy split, or if you end up in a losing the duchy split,
then it doesn't matter because Distant Lands is there.
This is true. The Distant Lands is there, so maybe... Okay,
Yeah,
maybe Distant Lands kills the role of Swamp Hag here.
I think without Distant Lands, I wouldn't get the Swamp Hag. Like, Hermit just deals with the curses. You don't care all that much.
I'm talking more about the money from Swamp Hag than the cursing.
I mean, you're not hitting 5 on every hand in a rebuild deck.
That's
so,
true.
like, you kind of have to hope you would have hit 5 when the Swamp Hag was... I'm really not sold on it. Like, I want to buy a rebuild or I want to buy a duchy with that $5 hand. I don't want to get a Swamp Hag.
I'm going to try it at least.
Okay, I look forward to winning those games. I don't think it's going to be close. Without Distant Lands, I'm a little less warm on opening Hermit. I'm still probably going to do it, but... man, there's just no rush to hit 5 a whole bunch immediately. You can just take a minute and thin your cards and then hit 5 and then have a better deck.
Yeah. So I could see some tactical taxing going on too on your crap turns, your inevitable turns where you don't have a whole lot going on, reading what your opponent's about to buy next.
Hashtag tactical tax.
Yeah. I don't think getting a ball ever happens.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so you might open with a Gladiator.
If I wasn't opening with a Hermit, I guess I'd get the Gladiator, sure.
Yeah. Could potentially be a gold at some point.
Yeah, it's not... I thought you were saying,
no.
When you buy a fortune, you're going to get a gold, and I'm that's never happening.
The Gladiator could at some point function as a gold.
Sure, yeah.
Oracle,
it's reasonable.
I don't see Oracle being a thing because...
It doesn't give you plus action.
Yeah, Terminal Draw is actually really bad for a rebuild deck.
Except for Faithful Hound.
Except for Faithful Hound, because of the synergy of getting the Faithful Hounds in your hand so they can do nothing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah, so let us know what you think.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear how right I am. I mean, I'm used to it by this point, but it still feels good.
Yeah, so... as always, we are going to want to announce that next week's raffle is coming up.
Yeah?
And this is a very special raffle, as we all know.
I think I might have actually consented to this one.
Oh, yeah? Nice.
We talked about it. All right. Yeah, this is going to be...
So, as we all know, Valentine's Day is coming right up. And if you win the raffle, are going to get to go on a date with either Adam Horton or myself. Your choice, just in time for Valentine's Day.
Yeah. You're gonna have to pay for everything.
You're gonna have to take Adam somewhere nice.
Yeah, I want something better than McDonald's, and also I'm not putting out. My wife is 15 weeks pregnant, so it's just gonna be a platonic date. Where you pay for everything.
I will go anywhere at all, and I don't have a pregnant wife, so whatever happens, it happens.
Yeah, just in time for Valentine's Day. Just after our bonus episode.
Yeah, right.
Getting ready for Valentine's Day, that's a thing.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, so...
This raffle's going to be great.
Yeah. You get to go on a date with either Adam Horton or myself.
World champion.
Dater.
What? No, that's no. Anyway, thanks for listening. Leave a comment, leave a post on the forums. I have the hiccups now. This is terrible. I got excited about the raffle or something.
Yep. Yeah. Adam's gonna meet his new bromate.
Bromate?
Or cismate.
Bromance?
I wonder if we have any female listeners.
If you're a female and you're listening to this podcast, I would like to be proven wrong in my assumption that you don't exist.
Yeah, I mean...
Well, besides Jake's girlfriend. I know she listens.
Right. She does listen.
But other than her.
Yeah. I mean, there are some really good Dominion players who are women that I know.
That's true. But I don't think they listen to the podcast.
Damn.
What are you like? What? All right.
No, not like. Okay, we're gonna edit this out. But like, not.
I bet we are. Guess who does the editing of this podcast?
No, not like. I didn't mean it like that.
I bet you didn't.
All right, just in time for Valentine's Day, we're gonna get.
Yeah, I think Jake now wants you to pick him to go on the date because he might be single.
Oh God. I'm gonna go home now.
I guess when you enter the raffle, let Jake know if you're a female.
I think I know who's gonna win the raffle.
Oh. We'll get her to not enter. Anyway, thanks for listening.
All right, my girlfriend's gonna win the raffle, and she's gonna pick Adam.
That would be amazing. I don't know how much of this we're keeping in the show.
I hope
this
like none of it.
Thanks for listening to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast.
A romantic podcast.
A romantic Dominion podcast.
Yeah.
We'll be back next time for some more episodes.
Yeah.
That are good episodes.
Yeah.
Not quite bonus episodes.
Right.
But yeah, if you like the podcast or if you think we're stupid, let us know.
Yeah, especially that last part.
Yeah. And until next time, I'll see you then.
Later.
I can't say that I've ever tried to enjoy anime porn with my significant other.
That's something you do alone while crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Spoken like someone who has some experience. Welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast.
A Yuri podcast. No,
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to edit all this out already.
Oh, God. This is the beginning.